Um, Welcome to St. John to discuss this important water issue. I'm Jeff Lammerman. I'm the water commissioner out of the Stafford field office, your local representative here. I've been living in this area since 1990, and I've been working in the Stafford field office since 2000. Remember when I was fresh out of college and pretty wet behind the ears, the partnership was formed in 1993 that tried to address the shortages in the Rattlesnake Creek. Of course, at the time, we were also dealing with the problems in Walnut Creek, which eventually led to an iguchi in that basin. Believe me, when I say that we all know that all parties pretty much don't want to be in this room tonight, but it's an issue that everyone's been working on for a long time, and we need to get this solved. With that being said, I know this is a very personal and difficult issue for everyone affected. I hope we can conduct ourselves in a professional manner and we can convey as much information to the group tonight as we can. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping issues. Restrooms are in the foyer over to the side. Emergency exits are to the front and two behind you. Now, if we have an overflow crowd, we can have 193 in this room, according to the fire marshal. We're also having a screen and a video out in the foyer. And if you feel like you want to sit down, you can go over to the library. They're playing the live stream over at the library, the Idalong Goodman Library. With that, I'd like to introduce Kelsey Olson. Kelsey is the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, on behalf of Secretary Bean and myself, I just want to thank you for coming out. Like Jeff said, this is a very important issue that we've been working on for many years, and wanted to bring as much information to you locally that we possibly could. So I'm gonna just fast forward here to our slides as we get started. So, oh, good thing I brought this up. These slides will be available by tomorrow morning on our website, so you will have access to this information, and we've tried to include as much of our talking points in those slides as well. But you can find those at www.agriculture.ks.gov/Quivira. There you'll find these slides as well as all of the other information and resources that we have regarding this topic. So I wanted just to give you an overarching perspective of what the Kansas Department of Agriculture, or what our mission is. We are a broad agency that, in a broad sense, are here to serve Kansas farmers, ranchers, and agribusinesses. And we do so by providing an environment that fosters and enhances and encourages growth within the state. And we advocate and promote for agriculture industry, as well as helping to ensure that our food supply is safe and protect our natural resources. And in a broad sense, that is our mission. Within that, we have 18 different various programs and divisions within Kansas Department of Agriculture. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch our slides up here. And one of those, obviously, is the Division of Water Resources and the Water Appropriations team. Kansas agriculture is a very important component to our state. It's a leading driving force. It's what many of us are engaged in day to day. And there's, throughout the state, there's about 64 sectors of agriculture, 64 sectors of the Kansas agriculture that include food and food processing sectors. Within this area, it is the #1 economic employment source, as well as where most of our labor income comes from. Of those 64 sectors, about 25 of those sectors can be found within the 5-county region in this area. As I mentioned before, one of our programs and divisions is the Division of Water resources. This program was set up in 1945 based under the Kansas Water Appropriation Act. At that time, the governor had set forth a committee who put in place some new legislation that would govern our water rights. Kansas was one of the most proactive states to do this, and basically what that act outlined was that the first right is the first in line is the first right to the water. The first water right is the more senior to the next one, and it has a request on the allocation of water at that point. It also established the chief engineer as the primary administrator of the water rights for the state, for all state water rights. Over the years, we've seen various amendments to the Water Appropriations Act. We've had water planning statutes. It established the groundwater management districts, as well as allowing for water transferabilities and temporary water flexibility in terms of the drought term permits. And some of you may be familiar with those. We've, in 2011 and 2012, in the state, as well as specifically in this region, we allowed for additional pumping to account for the extreme drought that as the state was experiencing. And all of these are continue to be administered by the chief engineer over the years. Bringing us to today, we are discussing the senior water right that's held by the Quivira National Wildlife Refuge. It's been over many years of which the service has complained of an impairment, and following the Walnut Creek Aguga, there was conversation that stemmed at the local level that developed the Rattlesnake Partnership, which was in place between 1993 and 2012. This involved the Federal Service, GMD 5, the Division of Water Resources, as well as Water Pack. And over the years, I think there were various attempts at different actions of which to mitigate the issue, but none of them were successful. Following that partnership, the service first filed a formal impairment complaint. As the chief engineer's role, it was his role to address that impairment and to make the determination if that impairment existed. And that was confirmed in 2016. So today's meeting, our original intent was to provide more information about the anticipated actions. However, this situation has continued to evolve. On Friday afternoon, Senator Moran sent out a press release in regards to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and had a verbal commitment from them that they would not be filing to request water for 2020. So we, obviously we're still having the meeting and we wanted to continue this conversation, but it kind of adjusts a little bit of how, some of the questions that we might be addressing or the concerns that you might have. However, what hasn't changed, there still is an impairment taking place and there still is a solution to be found. And we think that now is more critical than ever to continue that conversation and to try to find that path forward. Let's see. So just the content of the meeting, you guys should have all received an agenda. We're going to follow that pretty closely. I think we have one slight modification. We're not going to hear from Lane this evening, but he'll be around. I'm not to take him off the agenda, and due to the size of this meeting, we want to hear everyone's comments and concerns and get everyone's questions addressed. So you should have received some note cards when you came in. I encourage you to write all of your questions or comments down. We've included slide numbers, although they're quite tiny in the corner. If you have a slide that you'd like to reference or have a question to, just jot that down there. You don't need to submit your name, or if you'd like follow-up on that question specifically, you're welcome to include your name or contact information, but we're not asking you specifically to do that. We will try to keep this really close to 2 hours. We try to start right on time, and we'll try to wrap up on time. Our goal is to have about a 45-minute, 50-minute presentation, and then allow the rest of the time to answer any questions that you might have. And I know you've all submitted some questions already, so I do appreciate that. With that, I am going to turn this over to our Chief Engineer, David Barfield.
All right, thank you, Kelsey, and I do want to thank everyone for coming and taking time to spend the evening here, listening to us and engaging with us in terms of your questions on this, long-standing issue and very important issue to everyone here in the region. I wish this problem was not so difficult, and we're going to get into the specifics of what makes it so difficult. None of us here in DWR or KDA find any pleasure in issuing orders that create new restrictions for many water users, but we have a job to do under the Appropriation Act and a duty to find a way to resolve this, and so we need to find a solution. As Assistant Secretary Olson indicated, we've tried to sort of reformulate our presentations in light of Senator Moran's press release that indicated the service didn't want us to move forward at this time with these orders, but wanted to provide an opportunity for the basin to develop an acceptable solution. Now, we really don't have more information than that. I reached out to the service, to my contacts with the service, to see if I could find out more of what that meant, and didn't really get more. We don't really know how long a process they're envisioning, what they're going to be bringing in terms of to that dialogue and exactly how we're going to engage, and we'll certainly keep you all abreast as we learn more going forward. But at least that changes today's conversation, really changes the immediate future anyway. We will not be issuing any orders until the service decides that they want to file that request to Superior Water. So we'll work through that process and see where it takes us. But the fact that the service is providing more time doesn't really change the science, and doesn't change the science of what's going on here. It doesn't really change the law. We have groundwater users that are junior to senior, and creating a significant depletion to the stream flow, creating an impairment situation, and that's going to need some resolution in some way. The statement says that services wants to engage, and so the vehicle to get that done may change. Likely it will. Certainly seems like it will change the timing. So anyway, the presentation I'm going to give you, I'm still going to provide kind of much of what we were going to provide with respect to sort of overviewing the problem and discussing sort of how we got to where we are today. I will go ahead and overview the water administration plan that we've developed and how going forward with for a couple of reasons. Number one, whatever process the service and Department of Interior envisioned could fail, and they could file a request. So we want you to know, we want to answer your questions about what that would look like. But maybe more important is some of these elements might be part of the long-term solution that we get to. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my presentation. So we want to talk about what the problem is to start with. But I'd like to start with what the problem is not. So obviously we administer the Appropriation Act over the entire state, including Western Kansas. So this is a depiction of the water level change as a percentage of saturated thickness in the Ogallala and related High Plains aquifer, of which you all are part. Obviously, in Western Kansas, the dominant groundwater problem is one of storage depletion, of a declining water table and resulting declines in pumping rates and so forth. And we're obviously actively working out there to determine how to address that problem. Here, as you'll see, we've got some water level declines in the western part of the basin and central, but a stable and even increasing in the eastern parts. So So water level declines are not really the problem we're facing here, although those declines do affect surface water. So what is the problem? And there's really a kind of a threefold, all related problem. But the first is junior groundwater pumping is intercepting recharge that goes into the aquifer, and without that junior groundwater pumping, would discharge into the stream system is what we call base flow. So base flow is the groundwater component of stream flow, as opposed to runoff, which is the precipitation-driven portion of stream flow. So this is the, excuse me. So we have GMD5 developed a groundwater model, and we were involved in that process in terms of on the modeling committee, and our expert modeler also was a part of that process, peer review process. And we've got a really excellent groundwater model here that allows us to really look at some of what's going on here. So this is a depiction of an output from the groundwater model that looks at what is the base flow component of stream flow under historic conditions that includes the groundwater pumping that has been occurring. And what would that base flow component look like if junior groundwater pumping was not pumping? So the green line is the historic run, basically, and as you see with the development of irrigation in the 60s and 70s, we see a pretty rapid decline in the base flow component. With wet years, there is some recovery, but again, a general downward decline, as opposed to without groundwater pumping, where we see much more significant base flows that would be occurring. So this depletion then of the base flows caused by junior groundwater pumping is really what leads to the impairment of Quivira's water right. So that's the first part of it. So the second part of it is looking into the future. The model lets us look in the future and say, with the current level of groundwater pumping, what does the future look like with respect to base flows? As you see, this trend of downward depletion will continue into the future to years where dominantly there'll be little to no base flow in the river, which is a problem. It leads to deeper and more frequent impairment. And then the third, somewhat related problem again is looking at water quality. So this is there's some data collected with respect to the water quality going into the refuge, and one of the key measures of that is the chloride level. And Tom Stiles with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment compiled the data at Zenith, and what this shows, so here we have increasing stream flow in this direction and increasing chloride levels in this direction. And so as we have less and less flow in the stream at Zenith, we have more and more chlorides in the stream. And this is a problem. Just, as there's a certain level, it's a saltwater marsh, but there's a certain level of chlorides and such that makes that water no longer usable for their purposes. And that's around the 1,400 milligrams per meter level. When they have persistent flows that contamination level or greater, it creates problems for them in the refuge. Impairment causing water quality degradation is a form of impairment that we have to pay attention to as well. So this is really a lot of the reason why. I'll say that later. So again, those depletions were the basis of the impairment that we found in 2016. So I want to go on and sort of walk you through where we've been over the last 3 years since the impairment finding was finalized in 2016. KDA has been working with Groundwater Management District Number 5 to determine what to do. GMD 5, a principal feature of the remedy that they would like to develop is the development of an augmentation project. And I'll describe more details about that here in a minute. They started off approaching the service about remedying the impairment through development of this augmentation project. And the service responded that while augmentation was an acceptable part of the solution, as long as the quantity and quality were sufficient, they believed that some level of pumping reductions were necessary to make that plant sustainable over the long term. So essentially the GMD and the service could not get to agreement. GMD approached DWR to say, well, what do you need, chief engineer, to say this matter would be resolved in addition to their augmentation project? So we completed some technical analysis, basically runs the groundwater model to determine what level of pumping reductions was necessary to stabilize stream flows, not to recover stream flows, because the augmentation project is going to sort of take care of the past depletions, but to stabilize those stream flows so we don't have the water quality degradation in augmentation projects. It's becoming more and more insufficient as time goes on. So we ran the model and basically found with a 30% reduction in groundwater pumping, those stream flows stabilize. That's just what's required to make it happen according to the model. So in responding to their question, what would it take on the augmentation project to say this is a satisfactory remedy? We basically said that an augmentation project of 5,000 acre-feet per year, 16 CFS, and 15% reductions in groundwater pumping, we could say is a satisfactory remedy. So this is just a bit of a depiction to illustrate this on more of a simplified basis. So again, we have stream flow that's declining over time. We have an augmentation project that's providing for offsetting the depletions that have occurred historically. But as those depletions as the stream flow continues to decline, that augmentation project becomes more and more insufficient. So let's talk a little bit more about the augmentation project. So GMD5 has developed a conceptual proposal for the augmentation project. So augmentation is basically when there's junior groundwater pumping that is interfering with seniors, rather than cut-through pumping, one mechanism used in the Western U.S. is to develop an augmentation project, which is to find another source of water outside of that local supply and bring it in to offset those depletions. So there's an area south of the refuge that's outside the area of influence to the refuge that is highly underdeveloped because underneath of it is some fairly nasty groundwater. Their concept is to essentially skim the top layer of that area where the water's a bit fresher. They would have 40-some low-capacity wells that would, shallow wells that would basically skim that water, and then they collect it and pump it to the refuge. So we strongly support augmentation as a piece of the remedy here. We supported legislation in 2015 that says in the Rattlesnake Basin, if augmentation is brought by the basin, it will be considered by the chief engineer in determining, if impairment is remedied. We developed a memorandum of understanding with GMD5 that sort of extended the legislative statement with our assurance that would occur. We've been developing regulation with GMD5. Right now, GMD5 is closed to new groundwater appropriations. And so to develop an augmentation project in closed basins, you're going to buy water rights. And really, in augmentation projects around the West, typically the purchase of water rights is half to 2/3 of the cost of the project. So if we can open up this undeveloped area, we can, if this project works, then we'd save a lot. They'd save a lot of money. You would save a lot of money. So we're supporting that part of this as well. We do have some concerns about this augmentation project. This is a sensitive area. Again, we're going to have to. The project will have to be carefully monitored to ensure that we're not if we pump too hard, then we'll start upwelling some of the Wellington Formation water that's underneath. So we believe the project can be developed, and but again, the yield is somewhat unclear. So, but again, I do want to be positive about this. One of my duties as chief engineer is ensuring that Kansas complies with interstate compacts and that our neighbor does as well, the state of Nebraska. Thank you, David. he's timing me here, and I need to pick this up. So, we're benefiting from an augmentation project that Nebraska's developed because they can deliver the water to offset their overuse when we need it, and that's the kind of benefits they have in these as well. Okay, marching on through the story. So with that information, so what we need to accomplish here is an augmentation project and a 15% reduction in water use. So GMD 5 in August 2017 said they wanted to pursue the use of a local enhanced management area, LEMA we call them, to develop the remedy with an augmentation project, removal of end guns, and other voluntary actions to provide general reductions, and then specifically provide reductions in the high impact area. So just to make a long story short here, there's been a lot of work that's done between the DWR and GMD to try and come up with a workable LEMA proposal. Unfortunately, when the proposal came, it did not include key elements that are required in a LEMA. And specifically, so LEMAs are about a problem. It establishes a goal. It establishes what are called corrective controls to accomplish that goal. In this case, the goal was to remedy the impairment. And the problem with the proposal as it came up, the principal problems, was it didn't have a specific, it had a list of here's what we want to accomplish, but it had no specific schedule to complete those actions. It had no specific requirements as to how much water had to be reduced. It had no enforceable actions if those water use reductions did not occur. So I could not say that this LEMA accomplished its goal, which is to remedy the impairment, and had to reject it. That decision is under review by the Secretary right now, and so we'll get his opinion in the coming months. Okay, so it's been 3 years since I determined, well, it's been 6 years since the service asked us to investigate and take action. It's been 3 years since we've determined that impairment is occurring regularly due to upstream junior groundwater pumping. The service has filed a request to secure water. They did for 2018, they did for 2019, asking me to act. I declined to act because we were working on the remedy through the LEMA process. That process essentially halted, and so without augmentation available, without and on site, I really cannot delay action. It's inconsistent with state law and my responsibilities. We also believe that delay also puts the basin in jeopardy because this could be taken to a state or federal court or resolved in some other way that might lead to less flexible solutions than what we're proposing. So that's why we were planning, that's why we sent the notices out. The service had not yet filed its request to secure water for 220. That's why we didn't send out orders. But we wanted to provide you advice at the earliest possible time. Okay. So those orders were prepared in preparation for them filing that request to secure. Again, to give you time to prepare, the overall reductions in those orders is about a 14% reduction in your use, in your average use, which was part of the objectives to stabilize stream flows. The plan, we understand these orders are challenging to many of you, especially those that have junior water rights, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. So we decided to phase it in over time, give the basin maybe a chance for out years to come up with a different solution. We understand the impacts are significantly different to different water users. There are senior water users that are getting more allocation with less reductions, in some cases more allocation and reductions, but juniors also have more significant cuts. So again, we're not moving forward with that at this time. As I said, we're going to wait for the service and its process, but excuse me, we would like to provide you a little more details on what was planned. So again, these are the zones were envisioned. 2020, we were envisioning issuing orders for what's called Zone C, the area that's closest to the river, has the most immediate effect. That's about 1/3 of the water rights in total, and about 52% of the effect on the stream, because they're closest to the river. Zone B in green would have been issued orders in 2021, and then Zone A would have been issued orders in 2022. Approximately 50% of the effect is in Zone C, and about 50% is in Zones A and B. So that's one reason we go out so far is because there's, even though they're further away and a lower percentage impact, the cumulative impact is quite significant. So I want to talk about how allocations were determined. For purposes of water administration, we felt the most defendable actions consistent with the Appropriation Act was to determine allocations based on your authorized quantity and your priority only. We did not use historic groundwater use to determine your allocations. That would be a form of use it or lose it. We did not use proximity to the stream either. So we use basically priority. It's going to be the biggest influencer of your allocation. So rather than cut 500 of the most junior water rights fully, we basically provided more allocation to seniors and less allocation to juniors, but still provided juniors with a water supply. So the reason we did that is it's still honoring the priority system, but it has much less economic consequences of fully shutting off 500 water rights. Now, this is how we did the allocation system for priority administration. Under OLEMA and IGUCA, there are other ways to do it, and maybe we can visit about that in the Q&A. So that's all I'm going to say on that. If you've got questions, we'll provide more detail here. Now, recognizing these allocations are a challenge for some of you, we wanted to provide as much flexibility to use that allocation as we have. There's a lot of parts of the state that live on allocations. We have Walnut Creek that many of you are familiar with. We have Sheridan, Lima, up in northwest Kansas. We've got water conservation areas that people come and negotiate with us. And when there's a limit, when there's an allocation limit, there's usually two forms of flexibilities that water users want to maximize their use of that allocation. The first of those is multi-year flexibility, and the second of it is the ability to sort of move allocations around. So Chris is going to come up and talk a little bit about the water conservation area that we're envisioning to work with the administration orders, just to sort of answer your questions about what we're planning. And again, these could be elements of another solution that could be forthcoming. So Chris?
Thank you, David. Before I start, it looks like you guys are doing a pretty good job of it, but if you need a card to ask a question, just raise your hand and somebody will come around and get one. And if you have a card you have a question on, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll come around and get those too. So, yeah, as David mentioned, and he covered a lot of the things I was going to talk about, actually. But in order to provide the most flexibility and to ease the financial pain of reduced water, we tried to look for a way to provide flexibility, and the natural tool for that we thought was the water conservation area. The water conservation area is a relatively new law passed in 2015. To date, we have over 50 of them, saving over 10,500 acre feet per year, 80,000 plus acres enrolled. And they're working great, and part of the things that they do is they provide that flexibility to use, the two major flexibilities, to use your water in a multi-year allocation. That means if you have like 100 acre foot a year allocation, you could use 500 acre feet over 5 years, and that gives you the flexibility to use a little bit more water when it's a little drier, and use a little bit less water when it's wetter, and save that allocation. So it just lets you manage your water a little bit better that way. And then the other big flexibility that we thought would be helpful was the ability to move allocation around your water rights. If you have allocations for several water rights, you can move them among your water rights, and even buy, sell, or trade them with other folks who have water rights who are needing some water rights. So Those are the things that we planned for our water conservation area. And I think that's about it.
I think I've got one more slide, and then, okay. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So what happens next? Well, that's a good question. And we've already sort of talked about this. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has asked us to hold off on the orders to allow a process to determine whether a locally driven solution can be found. So that's that. Again, as I indicated earlier, I don't really have more information on that. We will be, we've already attempted to talk to the service about what they want in that schedule, and we'll be continuing to dialogue with them about that. But basically, they're sort of, this is their water right to protect, so they're basically sort of in charge of the process from here. If my last bullet there, if they eventually decide that a solution cannot be found and file that request to secure water, then we'll proceed with the orders we have. But right now, let's work together to yourselves and the service, and we'll support that process in whatever way makes sense, and hope that another way can be found. Again, I described how allocations were done pursuant to administrative orders. Again, there's other ways to do it. Many of the LEMAs, the Northwest Kansas LEMAs, instead of allocating based on authorized quantity, provide allocations based on inches per acre. So in the Sheridan LEMA, for example, they get 55 inches per 5-year period on each acre. The Northwest Kansas has a district-wide LEMA where they have inches per acre as the allocations, and it's based on the rate of decline in the aquifer, because again, they're trying to address a declining water table. So an allocation system could be based on inches, and it could give more to seniors and less to juniors, as opposed to authorized quantity. Again, there's a number of different mechanisms, so maybe this opportunity to engage the service could provide a different way. Now again, that's the opportunity ahead of us. We'd like to just encourage you all to stay active and involved in the process moving forward. Again, augmentation, in our view, everybody agrees needs to be developed, and we'd urge you to support the GMD as they seek to move that forward. So I think with that, we might start the questions. And,
Good evening. I'm Dana Ladner with the Ag Marketing Program at the Department of Agriculture, and I work with Compliance Education and Outreach. And thank you guys for submitting your questions. And we're going to start to go through those this evening with that. And so, David, the first question will be for you. Does Quivira waste water in their management and storage options? Does Quivira waste water in their management and storage operations?
all right. Should have given this to Jeff here, but I'll do my best. It's one of my responsibilities, one of our responsibilities as a division. That's why I was sort of looking at Jeff, to ensure the waste of water is not occurring. If we see an end gun that's spewing out water on the road, or if we see water that's going off the field, we have a responsibility to make sure water's not being wasted. So we look at Quivira from time to time, and we don't believe they're wasting water. They do have, they basically bring water into what's called the Little Salt Marsh at the top of the refuge. From there, they divert into 3 canals from there, and actually the river also flows through the Little Salt Marsh, and they pick it up twice, the 2 other locations downstream of Little Salt Marsh. They bring that water into to different storage where they basically have habitat or forage for the birds. They often bring water down through multiple cells, and there are times at the bottom they dump water back into the river because they've got a management that says we need to drop the water level. So they're using the water and they're releasing it. That's part of their normal operation that's necessary to maintain that refuge and its functions. So we're not aware of waste of water that's occurring.
Assistant Secretary Olson, there was a question on the Facebook page for tonight's event. And it stated, I'm curious why I'm hearing rumors of the KDA threatening extension agents and forcing them to comply with the chief engineer. Is there any truth to this? Are there any rumors that are true about KDA threatening extension agents and forcing them to comply with the chief engineer?
Thank you, Dana. That is not true. We are not forcing anyone to comply. We simply reached out on behalf of crop consultants, the County Research and Extension Office, individuals in the area who we thought, if these orders were administered, would be a great resource for individuals to go and to ask questions as we might adjust our crop management plans, or if we look at water allocations. And we wanted to make sure that individuals locally had as much information as possible to help address the community of which they participate in, and that's part of their active role. We did that in advance so that they would be ready following these meetings. However, there was no collusion. It was not forced upon them. In regards to K-State Research and Extension, they are a neutral party for many issues throughout the state and are really just a tool for us as Kansans to access to some great resources and information that they have. So we did not force anyone. We're not asking them to take sides, but rather just to be equipped with the right information so that they can help everyone as we move forward. Thank you. David, the next question is for you. Please explain the meaning of David Pope's statement in the transmittal letter for the Quivira certificate that, quote, natural flows of water to the full extent of this right will not be available in most normal years. Management plans should be based on probable flows of Rattlesnake Creek. Again, this is in reference to the full letter by David Pope that was posted on Facebook.
All right, and not just on Facebook, it's posted on our website where the full record of the Quivira water right is there. Again, this is a note on a transmittal letter where he transmitted the certificate. I guess there's a couple of responses to that. I mean, first of all, we are not guaranteeing they get the full water right every year. What we're doing and what I'm charged with doing in water administration is ensuring that junior water rights do not interfere with senior water rights. And we've quantified the effect of the junior interference, and that's the definition of impairment. I guess the second response would be is we're not, even in the remedy that we proposed, the 5,000 acre feet augmentation project of 15 CFS, if you go back to our impairment report, you will see, and one of the statements I made is impairment of 3,000 to 5,000 was regularly occurring, even in the record that only went through 2007 and the level of depletions that occurred at that time. There are a number of the drier years in which their shortfalls were, in the 7, 8. I think there was even one that was 9,000 acre feet. So this remedy, in terms of the augmentation scope, is providing a water supply for, is not providing water supply for every year. And again, the pumping reductions are about maintaining sort of the current level with that augmentation project. So thank you.
David, the next question is for you as well. Would the administration orders impact livestock water rights? Again, would the orders impact livestock water rights?
Okay, so again, obviously we're not moving forward with the orders, but every use of water was treated the same with these orders. So what livestock was provided in terms of allocations, every water municipal were all provided the same allocation as a percentage with the same priority. So now again, one of the provisions of water conservation areas is the ability to sort of move water around, and livestock operations often will have water they use for livestock, and they'll typically have some irrigation as well. And in the WCA flexibility, they would be able to move water from irrigation to stock use as they need it, as other uses could do as well. So.
Chris, we'll have you answer the next question. How often in the past has Quivira been impaired? And to what extent is Quivira required to manage water differently? How often in the past has Quivira been impaired? And to what extent is Quivira required to manage water differently?
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess I would characterize it as Quivira has been impaired quite a bit in the past. In most years, I guess I would say. Now, in the past couple of years, it's been wet and they have not been. They've been able to satisfy their water right. But in the long stretches of dry spells, they were impaired significantly. Our impairment report that we finalized in 2016 actually quantifies and has the years and the amounts. And like David was just saying, it's regularly in the 3,000 to 5,000 acre foot range, often going up into the 7, 8, and above. So that's that. And to what extent is Quivira required to manage water differently? Well, they are a wildlife refuge, and they're the experts on managing a wildlife refuge. And then David did, I thought, a nice job of going through kind of the things that they have to do. They have seasonal needs where they grow forage for the migratory birds that come through there, and that's just their job. So if we were to ever see waste of water, we would address it, but we're not seeing that right now.
David, can Quivira be required to dig deep retention ponds to capture excess stream flow during times of high flow, such as the ones at Cheyenne Bottoms? Can Quivira be required to dig deep retention ponds to capture excess stream flows during times of high flow, such as the ones at Cheyenne Bottoms?
The answer to that is no. At least I don't have the ability to do that any more than I have an ability to demand that irrigators, install certain practices. I have a duty to make sure they don't waste water. But I don't have the ability to order them to install such devices.
Chris, what options are available to livestock operations that will need more water than they are allocated? What options are available to livestock operations that will need more water than they are allocated?
Well, if the administration were to go forward, I think that the plan was that because there's allocation out there, some people won't meet all their allocations. Some people have allocations on acres that it's not feasible. So if there was a market for the allocations, that water could be moved to someone who needs it, like a feedlot. They could purchase water from within the allocated area, the administered area, if everyone was in the WCA.
Assistant Secretary Olson, we've received a few questions regarding the emotional stress that these orders could cause. Who is there to help folks with those emotional stress problems and mental health issues?
So in light of this issue, and just really the general sentiment in the agriculture industry right now, I mean, we've been experiencing some abnormal hardships in regards to trade tariffs and, commodity prices have just really been working against us all here lately. The Kansas Department of Agriculture, I felt personally needed to do more. And we're in the process of building a website that will be available in the coming days that addresses the stress that we all endure in the ag industry. We're pulling together all the existing current state resources and information that's out there in regards to financial stress management, emotional and social management stress that we experience, and how do we go about mitigating that? How do we help identify that? And I feel like this really just fits in if we're being asked to change or come up with a new solution to the way we've had to live and work in the past. This is just an extra stress. So we have a website. It's called kansasagstress.org, and that will be live in the coming days. I'm not promising it's going to solve everyone's problems, but I think that this is a first step to bringing the tools and the information that's available together in one place to help address this issue that we're experiencing in agriculture. We need to do more, talk about it more, ask our neighbors and our friends how they're doing, because just a simple conversation and sharing that with one another really goes a long way. So I'm here to say that we're going to do what we can. There's lots of information out there, lots of resources available, and I want to start that conversation and be engaged more and more with that on a regular basis.
Chris, what impact has the record rainfall this year had on Rattlesnake Creek? What impact has the record rainfall this year had on Rattlesnake Creek?
Well, flows have obviously been really good, but they've fallen off pretty quickly at times. We see the flows really spike and the gauges go way up, and then we see those gauges go right down again, it's kind of a symptom of the long-term issue that we've been seeing for the last years, which is that the pumping takes years to manifest as stream depletions, and it's intercepting all this water that's coming through there, and sometimes that can take years or decades. So I liken it to weather versus climate. The weather has been very good this year. It has blessed us with a lot of rainfall, but the long-term trend is that the stream flow is going away. So rain this year has had a great impact on Rattlesnake Creek flows for sure.
Jeff, this next question will be for you. What type, if any, metering is required at Quivira? What type of metering is required at Quivira?
Quivira has turned in an annual water use report like all of you do. So they have 3 points of diversion, and several canals come off of each point of diversion. The first point of diversion is kind of right at Rattlesnake Creek, comes in through Little Salt Marsh, fills it up, bypasses that, and there's a point of diversion there. Anyway, there's 3 points of diversion, or 2 points of diversion past the Little Salt Marsh. They have 7 meters that they report water use on. They just recently replaced all of their flow meters. They had an old ISCO Doppler type channel flow meter that they used, and they just recently changed to a newer style, better system that's going to be hooked up to telemetry, so they'll have like real-time information on all of their water use. It's going to be a really nice system for them, I think.
Dana, the next couple questions are for you. Can water be transferred out of the impact area, and what options will be available to achieve this? can water be transferred out of the impact area, and what options will be available to achieve this?
So I mentioned, so we're basically developed a rule, regulatory change with GME 5 here that would basically facilitate this sort of thing. Because again, to the extent we can get water out of the impact area, then that's a benefit to everybody. So that the regulation's sort of still working through the process, but it basically would allow for, typically we don't allow moves to be very long, but if you have a water right in the higher impact area, you can move the water out as long as the area you're going to would meet a specific hydrologic criteria in terms of the degree of appropriation in that area under a new priority. So that option is, I anticipate will be available in the near future. Of course, the WCA, if we ever issue the orders and develop the WCA would sort of allow moves within the actual area itself.
The next question for you, David, is, does state or federal law govern the water rights?
So obviously the refuge is a federal agency, but it is a state water right, just like water rights of everyone in this room. So.
Chris, the next question is for you. How much did you rely on Ballou's model, and why did you propose a different solution to the impairment? How much did you rely on Ballou's model, and why did you propose a different solution to the impairment?
Okay, thanks. We relied very heavily on Ballou's model. That's the model that we use to do all our evaluation. That's the model that we use to develop the impairment investigation and the resolution of the impairment and the response map. We use the Ballou model for all of those things. So we relied very heavily on it. And why did you propose a different solution to the impairment? I'm going to take that I'm going to suppose that means that Ballou's solution was augmentation only. And I would just reiterate the points that David made, that augmentation only has a lot of challenges that we see. We see a challenge with the longevity of the augmentation. If the stream flow continues to deteriorate, augmentation would naturally have to increase more and more, and we don't think that that's a given, that it can do that safely. We know that when the stream flow goes away, the water at the bottom of the stream, the quality of that water becomes poor and poor over time. And those are really the two reasons and where I think we diverge from Mr. Ballou's augmentation only solution.
David, the next question is for you. Will you approve a settlement between the Fish and Wildlife Service and the basin if it is different than your stated criteria for solving the impairment? Will you approve a settlement between Fish and Wildlife Service and the basin if it is different than your stated criteria for solving the impairment?
Actually, before I go into that one, which I will do, I wanted to piggyback on Chris's statements on, and again, we're sort of interpreting what the question was really getting at, but we've been asked repeatedly, Ballou basically recommended augmentation only would be a viable solution, and why do we disagree with him? And again, Chris has mentioned, Ballou's next model, we relied on his work, but we had several differences with him in terms of interpretation of model results. So one of the big questions we had is, our look at the data said base flow is going away, and he presented an analysis that said the base flow, that stream flows will be reliable out in the future. And some of that was just, again, we looked at the same model. He looked at it on a sort of 10-year average basis, and we looked at it on an annual basis. And yes, there are some intermittent flows that can sort of prop up the averages, but this area, this stream, if we don't make some changes, is heading to zero. And then the sufficiency analysis, again, we made a number of assumptions that in terms of what would happen, and if all these things happen, then the impairment would be remedied, but the LEMA plan didn't provide for all those things, as I was saying earlier. So if you really want to know more, we've got a pretty detailed document on the website that looks at that analysis and our differences with them. So with respect to this question, yes, the answer is yes. So, we've basically been the service has followed requests. They've asked us to investigate. They've asked us to act. We've specified this is what we think needs to happen to remedy the impairment. But if in this mode where the service is now engaging the basin and the service and the basin agree on some other solution, then that could be, we'll work to find a way to implement that solution.
The next question, David, I'm sure you can answer, is explain how surface water diversions work in Kansas. How do surface water diversions work in Kansas?
Do the second part of that too? You want to do the second part of that too? So I think this is getting at, well, so I guess I'll just take the Republican River. There's a big irrigation district called the Kansas Boswick Irrigation District, principal recipient of the water that we have struggled with Nebraska to get, but they have seasonal needs. So lots of water goes by the creek, by the river all year long, and then when they need water, they ask for it. They basically get those diversions, so that's pretty typical. So their use, like your use, whatever it be, has a certain pattern, and they're able to use that water within the rated diversion allowed under the water right in annual quantity when they need it. And again, the fact that there was water in the creek a month ago doesn't change their ability to divert that this month. It doesn't change their ability to say if the junior appropriator is interfering with their use, that they are entitled to have the protection of having that junior regulated. I think I was supposed to explain, I had a note earlier that I was supposed to explain the difference between a junior water right and a senior water right. So every water right has a priority date when it was filed with the division. And again, our law, as Kelsey indicated, is person time, person right. So Quivira, has a certain water right number with a certain priority date. That's 1957, I believe. And so it is senior then to all water rights that are subsequent to it. And that's the way our law works. So senior and junior are relative terms to.
I know that some of you were here at the 3 o'clock meeting, and some of the questions may sound familiar to you. The reason that we've saved some of those questions and put them out again is that they were really good questions, and that we felt that they needed to be heard at both meetings. So like I say, if some of those questions sound familiar, we did answer them earlier today, but we wanted to make sure that those good questions were asked again this evening. Jeff, question for you. How long did it take to perfect Quivira's water right? And why did Quivira have such a long period? How long did it take to perfect Quivira's water right?
Well, we got the application in, it's got a priority date of 1956, and we certified it in 1984. There was a period of time when they had some bad storms and all the control structures were knocked out. The chief engineer at the time extended that perfection period out through 1984 so we could get a good period of record.
Chris, based on your modeling, how effective in real water will your proposed allocations produce in stream flow to address the impairment? Based on your modeling, how effective will your proposed allocations produce in stream flow to address the impairment?
Okay, thank you. The proposed allocations, as David mentioned, are one of a three-part solution that we crafted. And that part of the solution was not to restore any stream flow, actually. It was to start stopping the depletion of stream flow. So depletions of stream flow continue to increase. They have been increasing for years, and they're projected to increase decades into the future. The stream flow is going away. The allocations that we were proposing to administer would have slowed the rate of depletion growth over the years. So putting no more water in the stream, just slowing the rate at which it goes away.
Chris, how do you know your models are accurate? And who developed the models that you use?
Okay, so I may call on David, who is a much better groundwater modeler than I, to fill in where I missed the mark here. But we know our models are accurate because they're calibrated. So calibration is when you go through and you build a model. The model is just like it sounds. It's a representation of a physical thing, and you go through and you put all the best data in, and then you run the model, and you see how closely your model tracks with actual historical record. And that's how we know that it's good. In this model, when it was built, it was pretty good. And so that's how we know it's accurate. Now, it hasn't been touched since 2007, but that sounds worse than it is, because it's the basis of the model is just the hydrogeology of the area, right? It's weather has changed and water levels have gone up and stream flow has changed and all that stuff, but the actual physical underpinnings of the model have stayed the same. Who developed the model we used? Well, that was blue groundwater out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the division was very closely involved in peer reviewing that model. As it was put together, we helped check the data, helped check the assumptions, and did all that stuff as a collaborative effort. So we have confidence in the model. GMB5 has confidence in the model, and we're glad we're not arguing about the model.
Another one, Chris, I think you can probably address. Over the past 5 years, how much water over the use goal of 160,000 acre feet have been used? Over the past 5 years, how much water over the use goal of 160,000 acre feet has been used?
I don't know. You can look it up. It's an easy metric to find, but I don't know.
I'm not sure what it is over the 10 years, but I'm pretty sure over the 5 years, and I'm pretty sure over the 10 years, it's about 14%, because we did that comparison. So it's 14% over the last 10 years. I'm not sure what it is. The last 5 years has been wetter than normal, so I would expect it wouldn't be as much as 14%. We could look it up.
I put a star by that question, so we'll look it up when we get back to Manhattan. Jeff, how will MIPA and water banking agreements be affected under this plan? How will MIPA and water banking agreements be affected under this plan?
Well, right now, since we're not doing any orders, we think this is kind of a moot point, but the plan was MIFAs were going to be suspended and the base rights were going to kick back in under this plan. And additionally, water banking savings accounts and lease term permits were not going to be allowed, because those are done under term permits, which become the most junior permits in the basin. So that's why that was going to happen. So if it happens in the future, that's planned.
I know a lot of you have submitted your questions, and we have had some that have been very similar in nature. So we've kind of grouped those together. So if you don't hear your specific question, we've kind of combined them with something that's very similar. So again, we've had some questions of the same content, and so we've kind of grouped those together to keep things going and make sure that as many questions as possible could be answered this evening. David, to what extent is the public interest and the economic impact of administering water rights by priority considered? To what extent is the public interest and the economic impact of administering water rights by priority considered?
Well, economic interest and really even the public interest is not explicitly part of that consideration. I mean, the law basically says that that no junior appropriator is allowed to interfere to prevent water from going to a senior appropriator. Period. So it doesn't list this use. It doesn't give any priority to use. High value use doesn't have to be administered for lower value use. The priority system is the priority system, and that's the law in Kansas, and really that's how appropriation works in the Western U.S.
Jeff, what conservation actions will be required of the service? What conservation actions will be required of the service?
We're requiring the refuge to submit. They've submitted a draft conservation plan to us. We still need to review that and give the service some feedback on their conservation plan. There's one on file already, but as we go forward, it's time to update it. So that's what we're going to do. It'll talk about the new meters and things like that, how they plan to operate and not waste water.
I do want to let you know that I appreciate good handwriting by those that submitted questions, because with these readers on and everything else, it has made it a pretty easy job to read your questions. So I do appreciate the good penmanship throughout the evening. Jeff, you mentioned this earlier. Do you have anything else to add to explain how water is metered at Quivira, or did you answer everything earlier?
One thing, I talked about their Doppler flow meters in all their diversion canals. One of the things that we're probably going to be requiring is some additional methods of quantifying what's being stored in Little Salt Marsh and what's evaporating, so we get a better handle on what's going on there. That would be in addition to their normal Doppler flow meter.
Thank you. Chris, was any consideration given for producers who have been conserving over the past 20 years? Was any consideration given for producers who have been conserving over the past 20 years?
The way that we crafted the draft administration that's on hold now was to base it on priority only and authorized quantity. And in that way, if you have been conserving, you're not getting penalized for anything. If you just fall in line with everyone else. So I think the answer is yes. That's the consideration is kind of built into that. So let me say it in reverse. If we had just cut a percentage, if everybody got a percentage of their recent use, if you have been a very heavy user and you got a 10% cut, That would be a lot different than if you were just a moderate user and you got a 10% cut, because all of a sudden you have a lot less water. So you don't get any consideration for conserving in that case. And we purposefully did not do that. We just said, all right, here's your priority, and based on your priority, you get a percentage of your authorized quantity, and that's it. And if you were already if you're a very aggressive user, you use a large percentage of your authorized quantity, then you're going to feel that reduction a little bit more than someone who is not using their water rights so aggressively. The average in the basin, I think, was around 76% of your authorized quantity. If you're one of those users that use about 76%, then your actual reduction from your use might not be very much. Whereas if you were using closer to 90 or 95, you're going to feel that more. So in that way, we think the consideration for conservation is built into the plan.
David, I have about 3 in a row for you. The first one is, what remedy do domestic water right holders near the proposed augmentation well field have if their water quality is impaired due to the augmentation well field? Again, what remedy do domestic water right holders near the proposed augmentation well field have if their water quality is impaired due to the augmentation well field?
Well, we will have, we'll grant water rights to that well field. Again, the regulation that we're developing allows us to do that, subject to, assuming that goes through, that'll be a very junior appropriation. So the domestic user is there now. And if they're, impairment due to water quality problems is impairment. So that domestic well owner would have the right to ask us to investigate and determine if that well field operation is in fact impairing them, and if so, then we'd have to shut off the part of the well field that's causing that impairment.
The next question is, how do you know that groundwater pumpers are impacting surface flows? How do you know that groundwater pumpers are impacting surface flows?
Well, it's basically, the tool we're using to quantify those effects is the groundwater model. These effects are well known. The geology of this area, the soils and the geology of this area, the geometry of the basin, produces this effect where, again, we have sandy soils, we have recharge that goes in the system. That water had to go somewhere. Historically, before groundwater pumping, it discharged into the stream system as base flow. As you pump water, that water has to come somewhere. And many of you, there are wells that are near the stream system will tell us, my level of my well hasn't changed. Well, where's the water coming from? If it's not coming from storage, as we see in western Kansas, it's coming from the stream. It's intercepting the flow that is destined for the stream. So this is just a fact of this effect. And again, we quantify that effect with the groundwater model that, as Chris has mentioned, was developed by GMB3 by world-class modeler and peer review by us and our modeler as well.
The next question that was submitted, David, have you considered removal of trees and invasive species? What impact could this have, and who is responsible for it? Have you considered removal of trees and invasive species? What impact could this have, and who is responsible for it?
Well, that's not something that's really, as chief engineer, in my purview to order. There are people, there is that kind of activity I know is going on. There's some cooperative efforts between the service and WaterPack and Agent Conservancy are doing some work around the refuge to do that. And that's certainly a welcome activity to to the extent we can remove non-beneficial uses that would provide water to the refuge, would reduce calls on the augmentation project. So we sort of support that. One of the challenges of removing trees and invasive species is either they come back or some other form of vegetation comes back, and so it's a very difficult thing to sort of maintain that reduction in that use.
Assistant Secretary Olson, how do KDA, promoting the economy, and DWR, trying to cut water use, balance the different three statutory duties when dealing with this problem? How do KDA and DWR balance the different three statutory duties when dealing with this problem?
I'm not going to stand up and tell you that it's not difficult. We are charged with promoting agriculture and supporting it to its fullest extent. And as you may have remembered, that fourth bullet point also talked about protecting our natural resources to which we all utilize and rely on. Based on that and the statutory obligations of the Division of Water Resources and our Water Appropriation Act, it makes it challenging to ensure that we are carrying out our fullest intent of protecting the water rights, whether that be for an individual, for an agency, for a corporation, and making sure that we appropriately and by law manage those in accordance to the way the state has set up this institution. It's not something that we take lightheartedly. It is something that is a constant portion of our conversation on a regular basis. And I know you've heard this from David earlier, but they really do think that the proposed potential administrative orders would be have a less impact potentially than if we were if a judge came in and just said that we have to shut off water right by water right in its entirety to alleviate the impairment. We don't want to hurt the economy. That's not the intent. And we appreciate all of the types of uses of water. And it's a very fine item to try to balance our overall mission of the agency, as well as ensuring we are carrying out and protecting our water rights to its fullest.
David, the next couple are for you. Has anyone considered conservation measures that have stopped water and wind erosion? Has anyone considered conservation measures that have stopped water and wind erosion?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what this question is getting at, but certainly conservation measures have affected stream flows in the Rattlesnake Creek and as they have in other areas of the state. That's not something, and typically they impact the sort of runoff component of stream flow, and I was talking about the two components. So that certainly is one factor that's affecting stream flows in the Rattlesnake. The groundwater model that Blue constructed considers that. They actually, in developing the sort of historic run of the model, actually seek to sort of model the effect of developing conservation practices over time and how that has affected stream flow. And then essentially when they developed the future runs, they kept static the conservation that was as it was at the end of the model run, and did future runs on that basis. So the model sort of accounts for that and determines what groundwater effects are in light of that change condition.
David, can the service file a request to secure water after a record rainfall year like 2019? Can the service file a request to secure water after a record rainfall year like 2019?
Well, the answer is yes. No one knows what next year's going to be. Obviously, they had a full supply this year, at least as I understand it. But again, as I think Chris mentioned, this basin is really not a healthy basin. So we can swing from a couple of years like the last two that have had much greater than average precipitation and produced some recovery in stream flows and turn into a very dry year next year. So I'll leave it there.
Chris, how many acre feet are short annually, and how much does the impairment grow each year? How many acre feet are short annually, and how much does the impairment grow each year?
It's the impairment report that we did showed that the service is regularly impaired 3,000 to 5,000 acre feet per year. So I think I'll leave that as the answer to the first question. How much does the impairment grow each year? Well, on the long-term trend, what the modeling shows is that every year the depletions to stream flow grow about 400 acre feet per year, meaning whatever it is now, next year on average it'll be 400 acre feet more, 400 acre feet more year over year over year with the status quo pumping. So now stream depletion does not equal impairment. Impairment is when the refuge should have got water, but the juniors took the water so they couldn't get it. So it's not the same thing, but I say that only to echo the fact that the stream flow is going away at an increasing rate that we would like to slow down at some point. It's really undefined how much the impairment grows each year, but I think it's suffice it to say in those dry times, because the depletions continue to increase, so will the impairment.
The next couple are David. Can water rights senior to the Quivira participate in WCAs and share allocations to junior rights? Can water rights senior to the Quivira participate in WCAs and share allocations to junior rights?
So, of course, we're not moving forward, but the water conservation area is something that isn't fully developed yet. We've described, as Chris mentioned and I've mentioned, some of the fundamental principles that we know we could include and would include in that water conservation area. We did not plan to have water rights that were not being administered in the WCA. But if somebody had, for some reason, some desire to do that, we might be able to entertain it and figure out under what terms. We would have some concerns about bringing in a senior and moving that to a location that might have an additional impact. So I'm not exactly sure how that would work. It wasn't our plan, but if there's a compelling reason, it's something we could, and we move forward, we could look into it.
I might just add that, because the service has indicated they want to work with the locals now and develop something else, if that's something that would work, we would absolutely entertain it. So there's no reason not to do that if we're starting over with a different plan and the service wants to make that part of it and it works for you all, we're certainly game.
I wanted to clarify some on the certificate of appropriation and the extension to perfect. So my assistant was yelling at me on DWR's certification memorandum. Of February 8, 1993, explains why 1987 and not 1984 was chosen as a year of record, and notes that an extension would need to be granted by DWR to AR 587, allows the chief engineer to extend the perfection period of a water right if other records or information are available for a period after the original perfection period that would reasonably represent the application of water to beneficial use in accordance with the terms, conditions, and limitations of the permit. The USGS gauge was installed in Zenith in 1973. The refuge's diversion works were not fully functional until 1978. The 10-year perfection period after 1978 was extended until 1987. The USGS gauge at Zenith establishes a good verifiable water flow record, which was used in part to quantify the refuge's water right.
Thank you for that clarification. Assistant Secretary Olson, what is Governor Kelly's take on this issue? What is Governor Kelly's take on this issue?
So Secretary Beam and myself continually update Governor Kelly on a weekly, if not daily basis, depending on the light of moving pieces, as we know. And although she has not made a public statement on this specifically, she has addressed the fact that she supports and upholds our Kansas Water Appropriation Act. So we are upholding that to her best knowledge and to our fullest intent. An extent that we see fit at this situation, and she continues to monitor it, and we continue to provide information and answer her questions on a very regular basis.
Thank you. David, how do you plan to deal with MDS requirements on Rattlesnake Creek? How do you plan to deal with MDS requirements on Rattlesnake Creek?
Okay. Didn't get that the first time. So that's a good question. So minimum desirable stream flows, most of you will know, Kansas legislature passed in the early 1980s a statute that provided for minimum desirable stream flows on a number of water courses in our state. There was a process by which the specific sites for minimum stream flow were established, and values for minimum stream flow were established and adopted in statute. So Rattlesnake Creek has two stations on that list, Maxville and Zenith. We have not administered MDS in this basin historically because we really didn't have the data, I guess, and the analysis to establish a reliable way to do so. We now have the groundwater model, and we really have a mechanism to sort of determine that relationship and to determine what we should do. We've been actively looking at that issue during the summer and fall, and have been doing some modeling, somewhat similar to the modeling that we've been using as a basis of the remedy, except looking at the short-term effects, because MDS is more of a real-time thing you do. When a gauge falls below a certain value for X number of days, and we administer it. When it goes above that X number of days, we quit administering it. So we're looking to finalize those decisions in the near future. I will tell you that the number of wells that we can administer on a real-time basis is fairly limited. Something on the order of 20 water rights that we believe would be regulated under MDS. In the Republican River Basin, we administer groundwater rights that are subject to NDS. So, and we do that in two ways for groundwater uses. We allow them to be administered real time based on the gauge reading. So they're on and off based on the gauge reading, just like a surface water user. But we've also quantified the sort of average effect of, well, actually the sort of average amount of time that they would be administered based on a review of the historic record, and allow them to enroll in a consent agreement that basically gives them 32% of their authorized quantity to use in that year as an alternative to real-time administration. So we're looking into sort of the same sort of situation with those we need to administer for MDS, either a real-time option or come up with a quantification that might be done under a consent agreement. So that's where we're at in that issue right now.
The next question submitted was, why was the boundary set at the 10% impact zone? Why was the boundary set at the 10% impact zone?
A very good question and a very challenging one. Boundaries are never easy, especially when they're sort of shades of gray, right? Which is the situation here. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, about 52% of the effect comes from the 1/3 of the water rights are within zone C. Then zone B has about 25% effect, and zone A has about 25% effect. And as we go out further from zone A, there actually are effects further out. They again get smaller, and they're a smaller part of the total. So it was basically sort of a compromise between. It was basically after 10%, we determined that we could sort of draw a line and not consider the effects of those further out. But again, to sort of not go out as far as zone A, there'd be a large amount of the effects that would not be accounted for, that would not be regulated, which would require us to regulate the people in to a much greater degree. So we're sort of sharing the pain and accounting for most of the effects from pumping.
Chris, a question for you. How does my past use affect my potential allocation? If you want it, you can hand the mic off to somebody else, but how does my past use affect my potential allocation?
Okay, the short answer is it doesn't. But the practical answer, so let me say a little bit more about that. The past use wasn't a factor in how the allocations that we were proposing to administer. It's not a factor in how they were determined. The only factors were the priority of the water right and the authorized quantity of the water right. So it didn't matter. But practically, as I mentioned before, if you are for instance, if you are one of the more senior users and you didn't use your water right much more than the average 76%, you probably wouldn't see any cut from historical use. The allocation would be about what you've been using, and that would be that. However, if you're a more junior user and your use was higher, a greater percent of your authorized quantity, then you would experience a greater reduction from your past use. So past use was not used to develop the allocation, but certainly it informs how you will experience that allocation.
Thank you. David, how will water rights be acquired for the proposed augmentation system? Could eminent domain be used? How will water rights be acquired for the proposed augmentation system? Could eminent domain be used?
So again, the regulation that we're developing would allow the basin to be open for the specific purpose of augmentation. So the GMD would have the opportunity to apply for the water rights, and they'd be acquired in the normal way terms of the water rights. So the land, the ability to access the land, they would have to negotiate, and they have the right of eminent domain if they would need to use it. Is my understanding. My attorney's not.
A few more for you, David. Should we plan to have a full water right to utilize in 2020? Should we plan to have a full water right to utilize in 2020?
I cannot answer that question today. So again, the service is not. I don't know what their plan is. I don't know if this is something that is going to be a narrow window of opportunity to negotiate a solution, or if they're planning to provide a year to do that. I just don't have the answer to that. So we'll engage you as we find out more about what the service and the Department of Interior have in mind. So.
Chris, can you explain why many water rights were cut more than the 14% average? Can you explain why many water rights were cut more than the 14% average?
Yes, so the 14% average was the average across the entire administrative area. So that is just an average, and actually the range went from 78% of authorized quantity for the most seniors to about 52% for the most junior. And so right in the middle there, that 86% is the average, and that's just the way the math worked out.
Let me look at the question again. So again, there's two ways to sort of measure the cut in the water right? So there's the reduction from the authorized is one measure of the authorized. So, and again, the most senior water right got 78% of their authorized. The most junior water right got 52% of their authorized. A middle priority got 65, and they were graduated. So if the measure of the cut is authorized quantity, then it's a different number. Again, we were trying to accomplish a reduction in use, which is what the 14 is, because on average, water users use 76% of their authorized quantity, right? So it's just almost impossible. You make your decision on what to irrigate, assuming it's going to be a dry year because you don't want to lose your crop. And then it rains, and so some years it doesn't rain much, and you use your full authorized quantity. But most years, there's some amount less than your full authorized quantity you use, and again, the long-term average is 76%. So again, if you're measuring the cut from your historic water use, then we had information provided from that. And that was a function of two things. The cut from your, so when you put together those two factors, if you're a very senior water right and you don't fully utilize your water right every year, there's about 24% of you all that have your sheets that actually got more allocation than your historic use, because you're typically, that would be more senior water rights that don't fully utilize their water right every year, or more conservative in their use. So, if we ever had to implement the orders, and we ever had to, and we ever put the WCA in place, there'd be some people that would have water to market, much like we see in the Walnut Creek. We have water users work out a deal if somebody has excess allocation, and that could go to somebody that needs the allocation. So again, on the other end of the spectrum, if you have a very junior water right and you have a more aggressive use of your authorized quantity, those are the ones that are getting the more significant cuts. But the average cut from historic use is the 14%.
Don't go too far. You mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but could you describe the communications that you have had with the service during this process? Say, I know you mentioned it earlier in your official slides, but again, could you describe the communications that you've had with the service during this process?
So, I assume the questions regarding sort of the remedy development, in the, basically about once every 6 months, during the last few years, as we're developing the remedy, we would call them up, our team would call them up with their team, and basically give them an update on what we're doing. And just sort of a factual update on what's going on. The service, has basically been fairly patient, at least in my view, and has appreciated the updates. They really haven't, prescribed anything for us moving forward. I guess they just sort of communicated, well, continue to do your job. When this letter from, so we have been communicating with them in recent, I think starting back in August. So again, when we denied the Lima and basically developed, we're working on developing this framework for where to go from here. In light of that, we called the service up to say, okay, you filed a request to secure water the last 2 years. We would like to provide advance notice to the basin if we're going to be administering next year. So we basically wanted to know and ask them if you're intending to file your request to secure water, we appreciate having it earlier rather than December when it's typically provided. So we had a dialogue with them at that point, and we've been sort of asking them every once in a while, are you making progress on that decision? Do you need anything from us to make that decision? And that included a discussion with them last Friday. So we're not asking them to file a paper, but we're saying, if you're going to file, we'd like to know it. So we had that discussion on Friday. Then I got an email from Mike Bean after that was all over that said, the Moran thing. So I did call him up to try and find out, well, what do you know about this? So that's really been the extent of recent communications now.
What impact does water in the Ark River have on flows in the Rattlesnake? And would it matter if Colorado released additional water? So 2 questions. What impact does water in the Ark River have on flows in the Rattlesnake? And would it matter if Colorado released additional water?
So unfortunately, this map doesn't have, so this map actually doesn't have the Ark River on it, but I think generally speaking, the Ark River is, well, I know the extent of the affected area does not intersect with the river itself. So that means the effects out here are relatively small. So, to be definitive about this, I probably want a model run to do it. We could do a model run that basically put flow in the Ark River at some level, whatever level we'd want to look at, and see what difference it makes to Rattlesnake Creek. So I haven't done that model run, but my speculation based upon what we have here is we would not see much effect in the Rattlesnake from flows or flows in the Ark.
We're ending the near date and time for today's meeting, so we've got 2 questions left. Chris, under the proposed WCA, will 5-year savings be carried forward? Under the proposed WCA, will 5-year savings be carried forward?
Well, we hadn't really fleshed that part out, but I think that our initial intent was that perhaps 1 year's worth of allocation would be rolled over to the next WCA term. That's kind of what we were thinking, but like I said, we haven't fleshed all that out.
David, are there weather or climate conditions or other future conditions that would lead to reinstatement of full water rights? Will the orders be reviewed regularly? Are there weather or climate conditions or other future conditions that would lead to reinstatement of full water rights? Will the orders be reviewed regularly?
Well, one of the benefits of orders, so when the LEMA process broke down and we felt like we had to move forward, we actually looked at two alternatives that are provided to sort of implement reductions. One of them would have been to start an intensive groundwater use control area, initiate a process for doing, for determining we have a problem and have a hearing process and determine what we should do. That's what we've done at Walnut Creek and other places. One of the typical reasons that we do IGUCA processes, which predate LEMAs, is to sort of gather information, from the public and experts that come to testify, so you can determine safe yield or other such things. One reason we didn't move forward with the IGUCA process is because we've got all the science for this. So that's one reason we went straight to direct water right administration. But one of the benefits of water right administration is it's pretty easy to amend the orders as are necessary. And I'm not sure I can envision a weather or climate condition that would reinstate full water rights, but there's a goal to reduce in the high priority of 4,400 acre feet of use. So if the basin comes up and actually requires more water rights than that, then we can actually just go in and adjust everybody's allocations up. And again, this project is premised on a certain level of augmentation. If more augmentation is provided in the future, then we could basically amend the orders accordingly. So the orders, again, if we ever end up going this way, can be reviewed and adjusted as conditions warrant.
Thank you. We've run out of time this evening, and we know that there are still some questions we didn't get to, but we will take all of them back with us and consider them thoughtfully. If your question did not get answered, you can also email it to us or call us anytime. That information is at the bottom of your agenda. With that, I'll turn it over to Assistant Secretary Olson.
I just want to take a moment to thank you for taking the time to come out this evening to talk about this issue. I know it is a very personal and a very emotional topic to discuss, and I want you to know that we are not taking this lightheartedly. These slides will be available, as we mentioned, on our website, and I do appreciate all the questions and comments that you guys submitted. Many thanks to the Stafford County for the use of the facility and the building. It was a priority to me to make sure that we had meetings here locally and provided an environment where we could hear and engage with as many of you as possible. So I certainly appreciate your participation and your willingness to work with us. I know the comment cards were maybe not, and it's difficult to manage a large group. So we tried to do our best with gathering as many of them as possible and addressing them on a one-on-one basis. And so I really appreciate your effort to work with us in that, as well as your time coming here. I do see the news release from Senator Moran and the Fish and Wildlife Service as really a call to action from our part at the local level to continue this conversation and to engage with some that have not maybe been engaged and included in the conversation or come to the conversation to start with. So I hope that we can take this and move forward and come up with some locally driven solutions and find a way forward where we don't have to carry out any administrative orders in case a request to file for water comes from the service in the future. So thank you again. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your willingness to participate with us, and please don't hesitate to call or reach out as this moves forward. Thank you.